Like me, you may be looking for the safest way to travel during a global pandemic. A little bit of a challenge, but you may have landed on the idea of the great American road trip, or at least a short-term road trip that allows you to escape the city that you've been cooped up in for all of 2020. I am here in New York City, and that's just what we decided to do. We decided to rent a camper for 7 days, and I am here as a first-time renter to share my tips, what I learned, and hopefully give you guys some insight for your rental moving forward. So while this is my first time renting a motorhome, I thought I should clarify that it is not my first time camping. I actually grew up camping with my family. We had a trailer for a little while, and then we had a Class C motorhome that we went around the United States in.
And we had a nice day there. We bicycled around. You guys did a little rollerblading. We went swimming when we first started.
And then as I became an adult, I got my own tent set, and then we rented a camper van in Iceland. So we've had a bit of camping experience, but this is our first time renting a motorhome. Tip number one is to choose the right RV. And I know how overwhelming that can be because there's so many options out there, but I think a good starting point is to determine how many people you're traveling with. Are you a solo traveler, or maybe traveling as a couple, or are you a family of 7? Once you know this, you can determine what size vehicle you're gonna need, and then we can narrow it down from there. The second thing I would think about is what type of camping experience are you going for? Do you want to be at campgrounds your entire trip, or do you plan to boondock, meaning off-grid camping for your trip? Both are completely fine, but it's good to know in advance what you plan to do, because if you need a 4-wheel drive vehicle or something that's a little more rugged and ready to go, you're gonna need to know that before you book your RV. The last thing to keep in mind is, are you gonna need a rental car? And I mention this because it's something that we almost forgot on our trip, but we rented a Class C motorhome from El Monte RV, and that is one contained unit. You're driving where you're sleeping. So you're not able to detach a vehicle and go off for the day. So if you're camping in a place like Yellowstone and you intend to keep your motorhome at the campsite for the duration of your stay, but you still wanna get out there and explore the parks by vehicle, you might want to consider renting a car while you're in that area. Tip number 2 is all about where you're going to rent your RV from. At this point, you've kind of gotten an idea of the size of the vehicle that you need, maybe the type of vehicle that you want, and you're ready to make that reservation. So where do you go? There are many places to go, but I would first start by just looking locally. Go to Google and type in RV rentals nearby and see what local businesses pop up, and support those if you can. Next, if you want to compare prices, I would visit cruiseamerica.com and or elmonterv.com. These are 2 of the biggest RV rental programs in the United States, so they're great places to go to get an estimate of what this will cost, and also what vehicles they're offering. And I'll dive into El Monte and Cruise America in a minute, but I wanted to actually point out 2 other websites that you can visit for a more unique experience, and those 2 are rvshare.com and outdoorsy.com. These 2 websites operate similar to Airbnb in the sense that private owners list their campers on these websites. So you'll find some really unique and wild accommodations on here, as well as regular ones too. But it's more of an Airbnb experience where you might get that unique opportunity. So I can only speak to El Monte RV because this is the only place that I've rented from so far. I do plan to check all these other ones out, but I'm going to use the example of El Monte to just go through this with you guys and show you what a booking actually looks like. We'll do Jersey since I'm in New York City, and I'll just randomly pick 2 dates. So these models that pop up are what is in stock at this particular location of Linden, New Jersey. And you can see they've got Class C's and Class A's available in different sizes and different years. We actually booked an older model. I think it only goes as far as 2 or 3 years back. We did a 2018 Mighty Class C. And you save some money by doing the older models, and it's really, to me anyway, it didn't feel much different than renting a newer one, but some people may want that. So if you want to save some money, go for the older model, but otherwise you can go for the newer models here. And you can see there's not much diversity as far as what type of vehicle you're getting. You're either getting a Class C or a Class A in different sizes. So that's your baseline of what you'll find at an El Monte location. And let's say I go to reserve. The reservation page is pretty straightforward. This website to me feels a little outdated, but it all is super intuitive as well. The cost of the vehicle is really going to depend on a couple of things. A, where you're renting it from, B, how long you're renting it for, and C, the mileage that you intend to put on it. These will vary from website to website and from day to day. So you want to spend some time searching through all these websites to compare costs and finding out what works best for you. I think an important thing to point out is the mileage package. I don't know how they do it on the other rental websites, but this gives you a baseline number of miles and how much it costs for that amount of miles. So 100 miles for $29. They want you to estimate how much you intend to drive ahead of your trip, which is why this planning phase is so important. So let's say I want 8 miles packages. I think I'm going to go 800 miles. It's going to up my cost over here. And it gives you a very generic overview of what is in the vehicle. One problem I had with El Monte's reservation system is it didn't tell me exactly what I was getting in the vehicle except for what was like built into the RV itself. It didn't tell me if I was getting pots and pans, if I needed to bring bedding, or if there was bedding included. None of that. So I called the main El Monte RV hotline, and they told me I had to call the local office to find out more. I called the local office and they said, oh yeah, we have a kitchen kit and a bedding kit. It's at an extra fee, of course. And I said, okay, what's in the kitchen kit? And they're like, pots, a couple pans. And then they didn't really elaborate. So I didn't know, did I need to bring a frying pan? Did I need to bring a pasta bowl? I didn't know what I had to bring because they weren't specific in what exactly was included in the kitchen kit. So for somebody who loves to cook, that was a little frustrating because I didn't know how much to pack on my end. And they could never give me a detailed list ahead of the stay, so ahead of the rental. So we only found out once we began our rental what was actually included. And then the bedding kit was also weird because it was bedding per person. So if you had 2 people sleeping in the bed, you paid for each of them separately. And then with the bedding, you would get a dish and a cup per person, which I thought should have been included in the kitchen kit. I don't know, it was just sloppy, and that was the most annoying thing about this process. But I don't know how these other websites do it. I just want to remind you that that's something to think about when you're making your rental, when you're making your reservation, because that can catch you by surprise if you plan to do a ton of cooking and then you find out you don't have any of that stuff in the kitchen of the RV itself. But overall, no matter which of these sites you book through, they're all really reliable, dependable companies with great ratings. I just urge you to read the fine print and make sure you are aware in advance of exactly what's included so you know what to pack. You don't want to overpack when they have those things provided for you. So things to think about, but you can't go wrong with any of these companies. Tip number 3 is for those of you who plan to stay at campgrounds. I recommend to make your reservations in advance. Of course, you can probably wing it when you're on the road and grab a campsite somewhere random overnight, but I recommend making the reservations because it allows you to customize your experience before your trip. What kind of camping experience do you want? Do you want to be right in the heart of the tourist location, or do you want to be a little more off the beaten path? Another thing to think about is what type of amenities do you want at the campgrounds? Do you want a more luxurious campground that has things like a spa, a cinema, tennis courts? Or do you not really care about that and are just satisfied with a picnic table and fire ring? Both are completely great options, and there's so many in between. It's a lot like hotels in the sense that you could stay at a Motel 6 or, a top of the line Hilton. So you really get to choose, and the prices vary tremendously. So that's why I recommend looking into this stuff ahead of your stay. Another thing to consider are the amenities at the campsite itself. Are you getting water, electric, sewage? If not, are you planning to use your generator and your water tank supply? Do you have a fire ring and a picnic table? Do you have Wi-Fi? There are so many options at these campgrounds, and I just want to make sure you're aware of them ahead of your stay and getting exactly what you want. Also, is the campground pet friendly? If you've got some dogs, are they allowed to stay with you? And as far as trying to decide the specific campground, I would search local. Go on Google and type in your destination and see what local family-owned campgrounds come up. Of course, you have the larger scale campgrounds like the KOAs. Those are always dependable and great. Just depends on what type of experience you're going for. And And I think a good tip would be to go onto Google Maps and type in the location of that campground, and you can get an aerial view of what that campground looks like. Because the pictures don't always do it justice and give you the best perspective of what you're getting at the campsites. So that's my recommendation. Tip number 4 is what to pack when you rent an RV. And I jumped into my loft to show you that, but I'm realizing that was a terrible idea. There's no way I'm getting into all these bins behind me. So let's jump over to the notepad and we'll talk about what I brought with me on my trip. I'm going to include the full list in the description of the video, but there are a few things I want to highlight. Like I said earlier, definitely try to find out what's included in your rental as far as kitchenware and bedding, but in addition to that, don't forget to pack things like garbage bags, soap, sponges, a Brita water canister, a first aid kit, towels, Ziploc bags or storage containers for leftover food, outdoor lanterns, a tablecloth, foldable camping chairs, a lighter, and more. We also brought along some games, a portable Coleman grill, and a welcome mat to kick the dirt off on. Honestly, if you forget any of the essentials, chances are campground shops will likely have what you're looking for, so not to worry. Tip number 5, our final tip, is actually a series of tips meant to make your life a little bit easier when you're out there renting. The first being, no matter where you rent from, whether it be a private owner or a rental company, I would recommend to walk around with your cell phone videotaping as they give you the overview of your camper. You're gonna wanna know how to use everything on this camper, and they're gonna go over a lot of little details that you're gonna forget later on down the line. So I recommend videotaping it or taking photos, whatever you can do to jog your memory when you're out there on the road by yourself, trying to remember, oh, how do I turn the propane on and off? Or how do I detach the sewage? So these questions will be addressed in that tour. And they will likely give you a manual. I got mine here. I actually realized I stole this, so I'm gonna mail it back to the company. I didn't mean to take it, but this is the complete manual to the specific RV that we rented. And we opened this a handful of times on our trip, and it was super, super helpful. The next thing is to be aware of roadside assistance or whatever their policies are if something breaks or your entire vehicle breaks down while you're on the road. You wanna know what to do in those emergency situations. For us, we had 24-hour roadside assistance through El Monte, which we actually had to use. Interestingly enough, the fridge, one of the hinges of the fridge completely broke, and we ended up having to tape it together, and we had to lift the fridge door every time we wanted to open it and push it in, and it ended up being just a mess, but it was a complete accident, and it seemed like wear and tear on the vehicle initiated that. But what we did was we called roadside assistance, and it wasn't an emergency. We could make do with what we had, but their plan was they were gonna send somebody local to us to come fix it. Turns out that part needed to be ordered. It would have been weeks before they got it, so they said as long as you can manage it, we will take care of it once you return the rental. But of course, there are larger problems that happen in RVs, so you just want to be aware of what their roadside assistance policies are before you go on the road. And perhaps most importantly is knowing how to drive your RV. That sounds super basic, and for the most part, it's just a big rig that you're gonna have to get used to, but you wanna keep in mind things like the fact that you're gonna have a propane tank, most likely, in your RV. That means you can't go through tunnels. And your vehicle height is probably way taller than you're used to. You're not gonna be able to go under certain bridges. So these are things to consider, and there are apps out there that make it a lot easier to navigate rather than guessing and figuring it out on the fly. You can't just throw it into Google Maps. So I would recommend downloading some of these apps, putting in your exact vehicle dimensions. They allow you to put in the length of the vehicle, type of vehicle, height of vehicle, and then it will calculate a route that will steer you away from those problematic areas. So that is perhaps the best tip that I can offer before you hit the road.
Everybody who comes here next time with us camping, please try my nice sample of the golden marshmallow that I'm making for my mother and father right now.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful, and if you're interested to learn more, check out my video on how to plan a road trip using Google My Maps, or tag along on a New Hampshire campground tour. Click the videos here on the end screen to continue watching.